When growth stalls, most leaders reach for surface fixes like new campaigns, a sharper sales deck, even new hires. But the real issues are often deeper, such as misaligned systems, broken handoffs, or unreliable data. That's why we built the Growth Readiness Score. In just 5 minutes, you'll get a clear score across 4 critical areas of your revenue operations and see how you stack up against your peers with benchmark data. Tap the link in the show notes to get started. It's quick, insightful, and often reveals issues leaders don't expect.
The emerging brands tend to do things through brute force. Meaning, it doesn't mean they've got this one great new store opening person that goes into market and gets them all going. Well, how do you do that 10, 15 times a month? Not possible if you don't have systems in place to do that. Or teams of people, right? That are consistently doing it, that are running the same playbook in each of the markets.
Yeah,
and that's the major shift to go from like 25 to 500 or 100 to 500 is you've got the unit model has to be sound and figured out, and your internal systems to scale and go to market strategy for these new locations has to be thought out, from staffing to training to supporting the franchisee and getting them the stability to marketing. Like, there's just all these kind of strategic things that have to be well thought out for that for that franchise, that single franchisee to launch and be successful.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. With me today, Scott Thompson. He's a veteran of the franchise industry with over 23 years of experience across franchise ownership, development, and private equity-backed brand growth. He has held senior roles with companies such as Level 5 Capital, Premier, Martial Arts, Made Right, Tutor Doctor, and JanPro. Today, he's the founder and chief executive officer of Your Future Franchise, where he advises executives, multi-unit operators, family offices, and aspiring entrepreneurs on selecting and scaling the right franchise opportunities. Scott, welcome to the RevOps Champions Podcast.
Thanks, Brendon. I appreciate it. Look forward to being here with you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because, like in every other industry right now, I'm so excited about the changes coming up in 2020 in the franchise space. So let's dig in.
Sure.
So you began your franchising career, more than 23 years ago, and have worked as a franchisee, executive, and consultant. What first brought you into franchising?
Nobody ever gets into franchising, on purpose. There's no one day I wanted to, being a franchise executive. It just doesn't work that way. My career in franchising started when I was I just graduated school. My degree was in exercise physiology and sports medicine. I thought I was going to be a cardiac rehab specialist at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. That didn't happen. So I had to pivot, and I found this company called Fitness Together. It was a small one-on-one private personal training franchise in West Newton, Massachusetts. And I met this guy, Brian Cook, who was the area director for the brand. And what was beautiful about the business is it was salaried, it was benefits, it was one-on-one. I could work with clients. But also they had a producer to leader program where I could ultimately come up with my franchise fee after working there, learning the systems, and become a franchisee of my own. And I did that. I was 22 years old, and I opened up in Dedham, Massachusetts, on Route 1. Highway 1. Incredibly humbling experience. I had no business experience. I had no business in owning a business. And I met some wonderful clients who helped me along the way. And certainly someone was looking over me for sure. Because growing up, my mother's advice to me was, Scott, if you fail, you can come back and live on my couch. And I really didn't want to do that. That was not my long-term goal. So the goal was to be successful at this. And ultimately I was. It was challenging for sure. I had lots of debt. I had high interest debt. I had equipment debt. And so I was pretty capital constrained. I didn't have a lot. So a lot of my customers were grown through word of mouth, or grown through networking in the community, and really being consistent with that. And there's people along the way too that helped me, whether it was sales training, P&L management training, employee management training. I learned I can literally remember people like Dawn Quisnell. She helped me with people management. having Hallinan help me with sales and coaching and understanding how to sell. And then, Bruce Patz and helping me with my financial back. So these are people that are still with me 23 years later that I still talk to and communicate with.
Mm-hmm.
Learning through the School of Hard Knocks. Opened up a couple more locations, was putting together an investment plan to open 25 locations up along the East Coast.
Wow.
And then Rick Sikorsky, the founder, flew out and said, "Hey, Scott, we need a leader in New York. We need somebody who can go to New York and do what Brian Cook did in New York." I said, "Well, I'm your
Mm-hmm.
guy. I'll do it. I'll do it." Raised my hand, and we sold the units in Boston. I moved to New York in 2005, and I didn't know anybody. I lived in Yonkers, which is in Westchester County,
Mm-hmm.
and started to develop the market. And in 3 years, we opened up 35 locations. I was like, "Wow, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be, my future is set. I'm really planning like long-term strategy here." And the Great Recession hit.
Okay, so that's back in '08.
'08, and I spent a majority of my time renegotiating leases for the franchisees to reduce costs, and so they could reinvest in marketing. I
Mm-hmm.
also spent a majority of my time doing royalty assistance programs to help these franchisees get back on their feet. And in the end, I kind of saw the writing on the wall. Like it became very challenged, and a lot of these people were failing, and our cash flow is kind of getting crimped. And
Mm-hmm.
we decided to sell back to Enhanced Capital, which was the private equity that ended up buying the brand. I ended up working for them for about 6 months, and then I was laid off, and that was 10 years of my young life that, here I am working really hard over those last 10 years. And there was kind of a shock. Like it shocked me like, hey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
let go. This is my first experience of being laid off. I, at that point ended up kind of, taking a pause for a brief moment. I was in Stamford, Connecticut at that time, and I tried to figure out what was next. And there was I had a little bit of debt still from, selling the business and getting out of that. And so I ended up met a recruiter in New York City who met with me and really hit it off with this French company called Piscine Desjoyaux. This guy, Nicolas Desjoyaux, was looking for a leader in the US. And I ended up setting up the subsidiary for the French company. And I lived in France. But it was kind of crazy because here I am thinking I'm going to lose homeless. I'm getting interviewed in New York City. And the next thing you know, me and my fiance are being flown to Paris, and we're in a dinner, and like, "Did we seduce you?" I said, "Oh, well, what do you mean?" And my wife's like, "Do you want the job?" "Oh, yeah, sure. Yes, I do." And then we relocated down here to Atlanta, and I set up the subsidiary for the French company here in Roswell, actually on Highway 9. It closed a couple years ago. It was, for 4 years I did that, and the goal was to kind of build the brand and scale the brand, but they really only wanted to stick with the single unit. And my desires I love brand building and helping brands scale.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just didn't check the boxes for me long term. And so I ended up joining Premium Franchise Brands, which is now part of Empower Brands, but it was Jam Pro and Made Right. And that was a really neat experience being on that executive team. I met some great friends that I'm still friends with today. Eddie Curry, Rich Kassane, and Catherine Rooks, all wonderful people that I, still talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And we sold that company 3 times through private equity. That was my first real deep experience in the board meetings and private equity and kind of running an entire development department. When I left that company, I was recruited away by Tutor Doctor, which was that was a Toronto-based education company. And they were scaling all over the globe at the time. So they had different teams in the UK, in Latin America, in South Africa, and
Mm-hmm.
in Australia. And so I
Right.
was a senior VP of global development for them. It was great. I fixed a lot of things. I think the year that I was there, we had 160 locations. So it was a really great experience of scaling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I got a call from a good friend, Barry Falcon, who works at the iFranchise Group. And he says, "Hey, Scott, I really do meet this guy in Atlanta. I think you guys would connect well." He was looking for a chief development officer for this cuff swim school concept called Big Blue Swim School. Ended up taking the meeting. It was a great meeting. Chris and I hit it off, Chris Kenny. And, we basically, I was like, do I stay? Do I go? Do I stay? Do I go? My wife's like, "Listen, you've never been the guy that, takes the safe route. Go take the risk. And so I took the risk, changed companies, became the CDO and managing director for Level 5 Capital. And we built Big Blue Swim School. And then that's when I just exploded from a brand experience standpoint, where we launched Heyday Skincare, Restore Hyper Wellness. We bought 112 Orange Theories. We had Go Dog, Kid Strong, Laundry Lab. It was went from like 5 employees to 125 employees, $500 million fund, and it was just a great learning experience. At that time, I also went back and got my MBA at University of Georgia. I still teach principles of franchising at the university today. I've been doing it for
Oh,
4 years now. I get a lot of joy out of that for sure. Just because, again, I didn't know what franchising was when I went to college,
sure.
and it is a great personal wealth building vehicle where you're not in business for you. You're in business for yourself, but not by yourself.
Mm,
Truly find the right brand for yourself, skills, experience, capital situation, the brands with where they have extra tools and support and technology to help you. Like,
mm-hmm,
if that's why working with someone like myself, you can kind of navigate that and then look at the right brands. And then that when you get into that brand, it's like you're working genius. You're focused on the things that you're already naturally gifted for. And so work becomes easy, which is what you want. And then you get the outcomes you want.
right.
Did that. So that was 5 years at Level 5. And then I ended up leaving, became the brand president at Premier Martial Arts. Challenge business was a bit, I like to, again, try new things and be, you know, push myself to the limits there. And it was there was a lot of things that were going on there. And I solved a lot of those problems. I'm not your person that wants to mow the lawn every day. And I feel like operations is that. It's very much, consistent,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
not growth and a lot of change, and then, solving problem, and every problem comes to your footsteps, your feet.
mm-hmm,
Then I ended up leaving and become the chief development officer for Radiance. And at the end of that whole, trying to really scale that and move the needle on that business, I started to recognize that a lot of companies are not willing to kind of embrace technology. And it's nobody's fault. It's just, I'm continually like testing AI, doing agentic stuff, and really exploring and really enjoying that. And so,
mm-hmm,
like, I'm at a great point in my career to go out on my own. And that's when I did. And I
mm.
joined Franchoice, and I launched Your Future Franchise back in basically September of this year.
Wow. So it's still pretty fresh.
Yeah, yeah. But I've got some wonderful clients already that I'm helping. I've placed
Mm-hmm,
2 people in business already, and a few more that are going to place in the new year. So I really am enjoying what I'm doing. I get up every day excited to talk to people, and I think that's been a first. I'm not doing board meetings anymore with PE groups. I'm spending most of my time using my talents and my skills to help other people, empower other people to be successful.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, and obviously you have the experience really to be incredibly helpful to anyone who's looking at getting into franchises, right?
Sure.
But so as you were sort of chatting, so really, when you started off, you thought you were going to be in wellness, and then fast forward, you become a franchise expert. And even though the whole sort of franchise journey started in the wellness space, you've now worked across all kinds of different industries within the franchise industry, and you're also through that, sort of a brand expert within the franchise space.
So I own some franchises with my sister-in-law and wife. Yeah, we're actually solo salon franchisees as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
sweet. Cool.
yeah. So this year and in 2026, we're opening our first location in Athens, Georgia. Yeah, where UGA is.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So actually, okay, so let's dig into, because I mean, I think, one of the things you kind of were alluding to as you were talking about your journey over the last 23 years was that, it definitely was not a straight line, right? Like all of us who've worked in entrepreneurial businesses of all types, and including in the franchise space, it's never a straight line. And again, the important thing is that we learn from every experience, even the ones that weren't great. You've now worked across many industries and sectors within franchising. What is one challenge that you had to navigate while moving across these diverse categories?
Honestly, I think the biggest challenge for any organization is people.
Uh,
It's gaining alignment with people on the strategic direction, and I think it's the hardest and most difficult thing to do. I think a lot of, there's projects and sales and marketing and all that stuff's it's kind of consistent whether you're whatever brand, close your eyes, the brand's the same. It's people and getting and really taking the time as a leader to give people a space to be open to change and evolve with change. I think a lot of the biggest learning I had is going too fast, right? And I think I work in a velocity that most people don't. And I have to recognize that. And that
Hmm.
impacts other people that don't work at a velocity. And so I think taking that time to bring people along for the ride is
Hmm.
critically important as a leader.
Yeah.
Whatever organization it is, that's the number one thing, the number one challenge.
Yeah, that's not surprising because that's we've done 100 over 100 episodes of this RevOps Champions podcast, and that is absolutely like so. And we've had all kinds of incredible you know leaders across all kinds of different industries, and I think everybody ultimately agrees that, and it's actually part of our RevOps framework, which and one of the things I really like RevOps as a framework because it separates us from technology and all the other things that people think that we can help them with.
Sure.
And the sort of the four parts of RevOps are people number one, process number two, data number three, and then technology or systems is number four. And we see this all the time. Like when a large franchise is a brand is speaking to us, they looking at us to solve technology issues, and we have to really slow them down and say, well, okay, well, we first need to make sure that the foundations, which is people, are in place. What do the processes look like? What are the key data points, metrics, KPIs? Like, are those all clear for the people so that we can then implement the technology to make everything better, faster, and more efficient. So I totally agree. And then you also you kind of alluded to the sort of what you've seen in some franchise groups where they don't necessarily there's a lot of opportunity for them to use technology far more effectively. What do you see as kind of the most common sort of mistake or what are they missing when it comes to using technology to scale?
Let me answer that question, but I wanted to give you another piece of advice for your audience. Like when you talk about people, process, kind of metrics and data, and then technology, I think that's perfect order. Because when you look, the way I would when I come into a business is look at it's kind of a staircase to operational excellence. Velocity
Mm-hmm.
typically doesn't happen unless you've got the right people in the right seats. You've got the right systems and processes and standard operating ways of doing things, or best
Mm-hmm.
demonstrated practices, or whatever you want to call it. Then
Mm-hmm.
you have your metrics and your sales and kind of marketing kind of growth. And then from a financial, then it's the benchmarks. Then it's like hitting the financial numbers. But technology is a wrapper around all of that to help accelerate that. It doesn't replace the people. It doesn't fix the mistakes that are already there with the people or the process. So it's really there to accelerate things. And I think that's the big mistake that a lot of people make is they think they lean into technology. Well, the technology is going to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, the technology is not going to have the discipline and the data and the behaviors that need to happen every day. It may help you accelerate those behaviors, but if you're doing the wrong behaviors today, it's not going to solve that tomorrow, right? So
Well, yeah, and exactly. That's a really good point. And to the point where in many situations, if you think that technology is going to be the solution, and to your point, where those foundational things aren't good, in other words, you're accelerating bad things instead of good things, right?
and you're gonna start to move away from the need where you want to go. Unfortunately, it just creates another void or another thing that has to be managed that is not necessarily focused on the end results.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And
the,
it sounds like
what was
Oh
the
no, go ahead.
question you had was about like biggest challenge with technology? Is that right?
Or just like not so much necessarily with technology, but like what is the biggest challenge that you see generally across franchise brands that there's a disconnect between technology and whatever their sort of bigger growth
Yeah.
business scaling goals are.
So franchising is a massive industry with a small pool of leaders that are kind of managing that massive economic driver in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are So when you're that big, if you're part of a big organization that has lots of franchisees, you've got a situation where if you didn't have a technology fee in the first place, or you didn't have the resources to invest in technology, and you have to then go back to the well and say to franchisees, we need to do this. There's a lot of resistance. It's gaining that, again, back to alignment, not necessarily with employees, because employees might be on board with it, and the management team's on board with it, but getting those franchisees and the advisory boards with the franchisees to actually be okay with the strategy and the technology fees, and layering in that additional cost into their business to then have the resources. Because here's the thing: if the brand is not investing in technology, your asset as a franchisee is not going to be it's going to be challenged at some point by someone else is going to come into the space and eat your lunch that will have the technology wrapper. And I think AI is the thing that all brands need to be looking at,
Mm-hmm.
because things that used to be solved in days and weeks from a human being can be solved
Mm-hmm.
in minutes and hours, and with AI.
Yeah.
And especially content creation, especially building processes, building manuals, building tools that ultimately you can give to the franchisee. Like, those things should be much faster. And then one step further is the agentic AI. It's repetitive, redundant systems. Rather than the franchisee having to go out and hire labor to do that work, now you can have a tool that's $100 a month that does that work for them. Follow up, prospecting, sending emails, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
saves them hours of time or labor costs on their P&L, which ultimately goes to their bottom line if they're still able to get that work done and generate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Scott. And I think for me, one of the other big learnings in the sort of the AI space in 2025 was the fact that we're we're starting to see things that we weren't even doing because they just seemed like they were too much of a lift. And
Mm,
now because we can use AI, it's like, oh my gosh, I can actually now do that strategic sort of thinking exercise or workshop, or we do, for example, audits of companies' CRMs. Depending on the complexity of a CRM, that can take someone 40, 50, 60 hours to do an audit to find out where the issues are, and therefore where the opportunities are. Whereas now with AI, we can do that audit in 3 to 4 hours, and then have, again, the same human experts look at the audit that's been produced by the AI and go and just make sure that everything makes sense. But I mean,
mm,
you've just so for the last 3 or 4 years, so many companies haven't been auditing their CRM because it just seemed like too much of a lift, and they could spend those 40 or 50 hours somewhere else.
for sure.
You know, and whereas now we can do it in 5 or 6 hours, and it's like, okay,
Well, then you can have it do the deep analysis work and come back to you, say, here's the report. Now take that report. What's the low hanging fruit or action items that we can take to implement tomorrow to get the highest lift?
correct,
And then all of a sudden you now have these incredible nuggets of strategy that you can go implement. And a lot of
correct,
times they might, my next step is, okay, can you help me create that?
yeah,
Well, like, it's just you're only limited by what your mind tells you can, like if you just keep going back to the well and asking it, it'll
hmm
continue to get better, and it continues to learn. That's the beautiful thing of the learning model, is it will get better for you as a business owner. And I think that's the piece, like, the people, like, just anybody who's in a specialized role, like
hmm
closing the books, like closing the financial books. Some companies have like 7 or 8 people closing the books every month.
hmm
That you don't need that anymore. Like, that
right,
that is an easy AI reconciliation thing that can happen pretty quick, and then have one person review the AI's work, and now you've cut staff by 6.
hmm
Same thing, and again, I don't want to cut people's jobs, and I think that's because there's human beings involved. But
hmm
if you're in a specialist role, like a lot of these high, like coding, finance, as a lawyer,
legal, yeah,
legal, like, there's a lot of stuff that's, again, you still have to check AI's work because there's going to be mistakes, but
yeah,
the majority, you don't need more headcount to do that work, like paralegals and stuff. Like, you can have one attorney who manages 3 digital employees to get the same work done,
correct,
at a fraction of
correct.
the cost.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, you're spot on. And I think the other thing that I'm realizing as I've spoken with many, many CEOs and entrepreneurs this year, the real place where they're stuck is, they just don't know what's possible. Right. And
Sure.
I think so that the biggest unlock for me seems to be Like, what is the mindset shift that the most, the highest leader in a company, the founder, CEO, whatever, they have to be totally bought into how AI is going to increase the value of their business of the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Because until they do, the rest of the leadership team and then the rest of the company is not going to buy into it to the same level. Or if you do have other people buying into it, but the leader is not buying into it, then people are going to potentially start leaving and going to work where leaders are going deep into AI.
Yeah, your A performers who are always looking to be more efficient, always look to have velocity and get things done at a high pace. They're leveraging AI whether you like it know it or not. It's just
Hmm.
you're gonna go do that every day. And I think a lot of leaders have to recognize that and not necessarily say they have to be
Hmm.
curious and ask questions and how are you using that and we want to make sure we want to make the biggest thing for brands too is you don't want your proprietary stuff going into a public learning model and then anybody has access to it. So it's understanding the compliance and the protection of the brand. Just like, but it was the same thing that we had to go through when we digitized all of our documents and we put them in the cloud, right? We just needed some security elements in place to protect the assets, and then it becomes more of a closed environment. But even better, it becomes more proprietary because the learning model is now specific on your brand. So as all of your employees are working in there, now that machine is like learning everything from marketing to sales to accounting to and it's
Well,
like
I think this is the difference between the sort of the analogy or example you're giving is that's a really good example, except this is happening across the entire organization, which means
yes,
that the impact is going to be 100 or 1,000x whatever we did in the past, because
sure.
where you're just fixing one internal efficiency thing, whereas now it's like you're changing everything about how the business operates, and that's why the leaders have to go through this mindset shift first, because until they do, it's going to be really hard. That's who everyone else is following, right?
Yeah, and I did not a talk, but I sat through a session where a guy from Microsoft, an engineer from Microsoft who's leading the Copilot project. He was talked about. He's like, listen, we're not 10, 15 years away from having digital employees. We're probably a year or two away. We actually already have them set up in Copilot. You can just, most people just don't use it and they don't
Hmm.
know where.
Yeah.
Um, but basically the generalist, the person who is good at managing people, is good in seeing a vision, understanding the end to end of a process.
Mhm.
Those people are going to be very successful because they'll use the digital employees to their advantage. Like, okay, I don't need a human being to do this portion of the process. I can have this digital employee do that.
Scott, so you've worked across many industries, and you've really become a franchise expert, right? So when you sort of zoom out, like as high up as you can and look back down on the franchise industry, like what is the one thing that all sort of franchise brands have in common? Like what is the common fabric that makes franchising unique from other business scaling models?
So this is where it's different from like a corporate environment. The people that work in franchising understand, the good franchisors, then the leaders in good franchise systems understand that they do not exist. The business does not exist without the success of the franchisees. So the most common thing, that theme and thing that we have to do is be an educational arm and resource and training arm for those franchises. Make sure they're successful by where they're
Uh-huh.
weak, because everyone's got a weakness as a franchisee because they're not entrepreneurs, right? I wouldn't call them entrepreneurs, but they're be entrepreneurs. They're not going to go be like Elon Musk and go start something. They're
Yeah.
buying a unit model and
Uh-huh.
they're investing to get a return or an outcome that they want and a lifestyle they want. And
Correct.
it's financial freedom, time freedom, right? So those brands have to understand those franchisees, their personal compelling reason why they're getting into the business, where their transferable skills are, what skills that they need to support them in. So if they're not marketing people, let's make sure that there's a good, solid go-to-market strategy for them and a plan for them and give them that playbook so they can execute. Or a good CRM tool that does the prospecting for them and puts
Uh-huh.
appointments in their calendar without them having to even do anything.
Mm-hmm.
On the $100 and I get 10 people in and, I get one customer. So there's they understand the funnel and the metrics associated with driving the funnel. So
Right.
if it's franchisee, it's like a coin operated machine. I put a quarter in, I get $1 out. And that's ultimately what good brands will do consistently, is make sure they understand their coin operated machine, how it works, how to train the people on that, and what type of franchisee, what that ideal franchisee profile is to get into that business, whether it's, the capital situation, the experience, the leadership skills, the actual day-to-day skills of what they're going to be doing. Those are really thought out, and those profiles and avatars are built out for us as consultants, so that I can go find those people, because I talk to different people on a regular basis, and I can say, okay, this brand would be great for this person and that person.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you've actually created some sort of an evaluation profile to do that, right?
I don't
Or
want to say
would
we've got a system that we follow.
a system?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll spend, most people will fill out a standard confidential questionnaire, which is baseline information. And then I spend 2.5 hours with people to really dig into who they are, their stories, because everyone's got a story, and what they truly want and where their roadblocks are in life. Like, because everyone's got self-limiting beliefs. And once I understand that those are factors, and then it helps me when I go to align with the brand, where their risk tolerance will be, how quickly they need a return on their investment, is their spouse working or not, is their spouse, understanding that type of stuff to then build their business model. So I build a, thorough, detailed business model. It's probably 4 or 5 pages long, and how it becomes the filtering tool that we use to put the brands through before I present the brands to them. And I present 3 to 5 brands, probably 3 to 4 mostly. And then they do the due diligence, and they usually from different industries, different, because then we've picked the industries that they ultimately are, curious about or excited about. And then they do the investigation, and I give them the procedural tools to investigate those brands. And it's really a process of mutual elimination. We'll meet on a regular cadence, ask questions, filter, again, going back to the business model and their personal compelling reason why, and figuring out what factors they liked, what they didn't like, what they want to get rid of, and what they want to focus on. And then getting them to a place where they're prepared. There's no surprises, right? There shouldn't be any surprises. They can validate with the franchisees. They can do the pro forma. I have funding consultants I work with that I help them get in touch with, so that they know what their cost of capital will be, and how much time it's going to take to capital. So then when they go to confirmation day or decision day, they're ready to go. They've done all the work. And now it's a matter of the brand saying, yep, we like this person, we want to go with them. And yes, I want to do this. And then it's the final. I have legal counsel that I usually help them with as well. But I do all that to try to make it easy for them. And I don't ever force anybody into anything. I really try to make sure that I'm asking the questions and peeling back the onion. Like, well, you're saying this. Is that true? Did you validate that? Did you get a data point from the franchisee on that? Because if you're making assumptions in your head, that's fear manifesting. Fear manifests in crazy ways with people. And I tell people that I work through fear.
Yeah, because this is a big investment that they're making.
Yeah. And it's incredible that the stories that people create. The old saying of fear is false evidence appearing real is a real statement. It's true.
Yeah. So I guess, like, not having gone through that process that you're describing, and that you provide, the service you provide to folks trying to get into the franchise space or wanting to get in the franchise space. So obviously, from a franchise brand perspective, from a franchisor perspective, you're helping that match them with franchisors who are more likely to set them up for success, right?
100%.
And so, and you've talked a little bit about what some of those things are. One example that always seems to come up in a franchise conversation from a franchise development perspective is, every fran dev consultant is hoping to get that multi-unit franchisee, right? So whether it's the Atlanta metro area or the Minneapolis, St. Paul metro area, you name the metro, every fran dev person is like, oh, I need to get that franchisee who's going to take the 5 units around that particular metro area. But they also, the smart ones know that, most most franchisees coming into this for the first time are most likely they're going to just take one unit because they want to make sure that that one unit is successful before they, get into the second, the third, and the fourth. So how does that sort of play out in reality? I mean, how many multi-unit franchisees are there right off the bat, and what is the typical timeline for a multi-unit franchisee versus a franchisee who's only ever going to buy and own one unit?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of multi-unit operators that come in that want to they see the unit model and they understand it and they feel like they can execute against it and they're confident in it based on talking with existing franchisees. To get family offices or small private equities to come into a brand, you need to be very buttoned up. In the unit model has to be incredibly figured out. You cannot, there's no guesswork in every area of the business. It has to be well thought out. All the playbooks have to be in place. And there has to show a trend or consistency. If I open this like a business, I put $100,000 in, I know in 3 years I'm getting paid back, or a year I'm getting paid back. Whatever the payback, the return on investment, those factors have been repeated multiple times over and over again. And then those type of business people will get into the franchisor. Now, average franchisees, which is the everyday person who is thinking of franchising and they're maybe an executive and they've got this drive and they want to go build something. Those people, they can buy, a market and maybe 3 to 5 territories, and that just gives them that white space to grow. In my opinion, it's always good to have some level of white space, especially if you want to exit the business, because then you have something that the new investor coming in can open that 3rd, 4th, 5th location and be able to get a higher return when they want to get out of the business. White space is good. I will say that a lot of people underestimate. I never push my clients saying, go buy a 10-pack. If you don't have the experience, there's no reason to go do that. There will always be units there if you want to grow into additional units, even if they say they're going to be sold out. Someone at some point got into this and may not like it anymore and will eventually want to get out. And that's an opportunity for you to buy that unit when you're successful. It's important to really, 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 really be good at the business and understand the levers that you need to pull as a franchisee to make that business successful. And until you have that team built and are consistently doing that, don't buy more than 3 units. And most consultants will kill me for saying that because they want to, they want to maximize their return as well. But it's if you're not able to prove that model out and you go buy 10 units and you get one open, what good is that for the franchisor and what good is that for you, the franchisee?
Exactly. And which we see all the time, right? Where someone has bought, they've committed to taking all 5 units and essentially wiping out an entire metro area. In other words, they have the rights to that area for whatever the amount of time is that they agreed on. But if the first unit doesn't succeed, the other 4 units aren't gonna happen, which means that brand has like zero presence in that market for
sure. And then they keep sell that market until the franchisee either defaults or whatever. And if the development schedule, they're on time and they're just, it's just, they're not in it, but they still know they're not going to develop. It just does handcuff the brand. And honestly, it handcuffs the franchisee's cash too. Because if they had that extra cash that they put in the franchise fee for those additional units, they could be putting in the marketing programs, hiring that right GM that they need to hire to really scale the business. And it's just putting those building blocks in place. You can always scale if you have the right team and you understand the levers in the unit model and it's performing. The next unit's always going to be there. And it was me too. Like it was like when I was scaling as a franchisee, I thought I was going to open up 25 units. I had a plan to do that because I had figured out the unit model. But then someone came to me and said, that's high risk. You're going to sign 25 leases. Like, why don't you do this? This is more passive income. Like, oh, okay. So another opportunity presented itself because I was prepared to do something else. And so I think that's the thing that people have to understand. Once you get into a franchise system, there will be opportunities for you.
Right.
If you're
so, Scott, as we look at the struggles for franchise brands as they're growing, is like what happens? Like, what's different between a brand that has 20 units total versus a brand that has 50 units total and a brand that has 100+ units total? Like, what are they doing differently? And again, this comes back to like when you're advising a client of yours, like on what sort of franchise do you get into? I mean, are you even considering franchise brands that only have 20 or 30 units or locations, or is there a reason that you're looking at 50 or 100 plus type franchise brands?
So the beauty of someone that has 50 units open or more, or even 25 units or more, the unit model should be consistent. There should be some performance that they can trend out if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to get these results. And
Mm-hmm.
they're in multiple markets. It's not just the Southeast or the Northeast.
Sure.
They've done
Yeah.
it in multiple markets. They've done it in suburban markets, metro markets. They know their unit model at that point.
Mm-hmm.
From a franchisor perspective, it really comes down to just the support infrastructure they have in place and the teams and the capital they can invest to hire those teams. Because a lot of times, depending on the royalties that are being produced, a lot of those emerging brands, they're not royalty sufficient, which means having enough cash flow from their royalties to pay their scalable team to support franchisees. So they're still having to put cash in either from the franchise fees or capital from an investor to continue to grow the brand.
Okay.
Once they get to that royalty sufficiency and they don't need the cash from the franchise fees or from the machine kind of runs itself. That's a great spot because they can make the strategic investments into technology, into other marketing programs, ways of growing the franchisee same store sales, or increasing the unit count of the brand. You got these big platforms that are out there now that have multiple brands. Well, the reason why they do that is because you can have these incredibly senior teams at the highest level building the plans for the brands, and they get these great resources to help kind of scale the brand without each individual brand having to brunt the cost of having to hire those senior leaders. And so it's like a split cost. So like 25% of the CMO goes to these 4 brands.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. It comes down to unit economics just at a different level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how many? I mean, again, I know this is probably public knowledge, and where I could just look it up somewhere. But how many franchise brands don't get past 20 units for whatever reason?
I want to say it's a high percentage. I want to say and maybe don't quote me on this because I don't want to be correct, but I want to say I think the 100 unit mark is the real metric. 100 open units. I want to say less than 10%, less than 5% get over 100 units open. Now that's open. That's not sold, right? Because there's a lot of brands that will sell 200 or 300 units and never get them open, right?
Okay, interesting.
That's the problem too, right?
Sure.
That's why if you're going to grow and scale and use like consultants like us that are going to get you high quality candidates, you better have your scaled systems in place. That's the other thing I was going to say. The emerging brands tend to do things through brute force. And it doesn't mean they've got this one great new store opening person that goes into market and gets them all going. Well, how do you do that 10, 15 times a month? Not possible if you don't have systems in place to do that. And or teams of people, right? That are consistently doing it, that are running the same playbook in each of the markets.
Yeah.
And that's the major shift to go from like 25 to 500 or 100 to 500 is you've got the unit model has to be sound and figured out, and your internal systems to scale and go to market strategy for these new locations has to be thought out, from staffing to training to supporting the franchisee and getting them the stability to marketing. Like there's just all these kind of strategic things that have to be well thought out for that franchise, that single franchisee to launch and be successful.
So essentially, I guess sort of what you're saying is that the reason that so many franchise brands don't get to 100 and then go past 100 is because of the lack of the right people, the lack of the right systems, and which ultimately then comes back to the lack of strategic thinking and planning to look at the things that are going to help the franchise brand scale, which again comes back to people and systems, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the people that got you to 100 units may not be the people that get you to 500 units. It's just a bit, or like, I'm probably not good at running a $1 billion company because it's a different skill set, right? And there's blind spots versus, running maybe $50 to $100 million company. That's feasible, right? And, so you have to look for, as your business grows and scales, you've got to make the strategic changes and investments in systems, people, technology to get you to the next level. Like there's a great book, What Got You There is Not Going to Get You There.
Yes. What got you here isn't going to get you there. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I guess it's interesting. I mean, and this is not just in the franchise industry. This goes across all entrepreneurial businesses, right?
Any business
Is
really.
ultimately the obstacle becomes the leader themselves, right? So until they're able to move themselves out of the way, it's not going to scale beyond their capability, right?
Yes, for sure.
Unless they have that unique ability to be both an incredible people person, hiring
Yep.
and growing people's careers, and then being able to grow the systems that make it more, make it easier to scale.
Yeah, I mean there are companies that have either strategic advisors or smart enough to have a board of directors that early on to help,
Hmm.
uh, but it's pretty rare. Most founders kind of are cowboys, cowgirls, and they're just going hard and focusing on their passion and their vision, and not
Sure.
always thinking about all the stuff behind them that needs to be organized and process oriented.
Yeah, yeah. Which again, I mean, but that's what got them to where they are in the first place, right? That grit and determination. So, Scott, as we wrap up here, for someone exploring franchising for the first time, what is the most important first step in making a smart investment decision in a franchise?
I think the first thing is understanding yourself, understanding kind of what you want, not focusing on the widget, focus on, what are my skills? What is my capital situation? Who are my circle that my advisors,
Mm,
and what business is going to serve me well and allow me to get to where I want to go.
mm-hmm.
You can answer those questions, then you can then start to look at businesses. But so many people could do the opposite, right? I have a passion for pets, or I have a passion for French fries, or I have a passion for whatever it is,
Mm,
kids or whatever, and they just go because other people have done it, right?
yeah, yeah,
And because somebody else is successful in a business, the type of business, doesn't mean you're going to be successful. I think that's why what we do at Your Future Franchise and Franchoice is such a valuable resource, is because I do help people pause for a second, go through a process, and then really understand what their goals and desires are, and then help them
yeah,
get. And if there is a gap, I will tell them. If they don't have the resources to open a big $1 million plus investment, I'll tell them that, like, don't do it. You're too early. It's
yeah.
not the right time.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and I think it loops back to what you were saying earlier about like how you often see fear and anxiety show up, when people are going through this process. And as you were saying that, I was thinking it comes back to something we see all the time, which is one of the biggest mistakes that we make as humans is comparing ourselves to other people,
For
right?
sure.
And instead of just being the best, most successful version of yourself, we get caught in this thing of like, oh, I need to be like, success looks like that. How do I do that? And then you just get caught up in this
There,
weird.
there are breadcrumbs, though. There are breadcrumbs that successful people leave that I
Yes,
think you can certainly learn from. But I think what you
absolutely.
said, go to your internal heart, understand what your purpose is, and if you can understand your purpose, then it's much easier to get to figuring out what is next and how to get.
Mm,
So I try to uncover that from people, like figure out what is their personal compelling reason why. If you can nail that, then everything else we can figure out. It's all kind of transactional at that point, and that helps match the right brand.
Okay, so I think that was super helpful. And then now let's flip that around. What advice would you give to franchise brands in 2026 that will make them more successful so that you're able to match them with more franchisees?
So the biggest thing they can do is understanding who their ideal franchisee profile is. On the opposite side, be very precise on what you're looking for. Don't make exceptions. Don't bring somebody on because they have a check, they have the money, but they don't check these other boxes. Like if
Mm,
they're truly not going to do, don't like Chick-fil-A will not let you into their franchise system unless you have these things, right? And there's a
hmm.
reason why they have 10,000 people lined up every month to want to become a franchisee with them. Do the same thing for your business. Really find, and again, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to bring people on. You're like, gosh, I didn't see this coming. Like, how did I miss this? But know that, learn from that pretty quick and make the change. Get rid of them. Help them exit the system. But then
Hmm.
also make sure, as you learn, what are the tangible and intangible skills or experiences that they have to be
Hmm.
truly successful at this. And when you figure that out and you have maybe a couple avatars of who you're looking for,
Hmm.
to us and we'll go find them for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today. This was super interesting, and I know very valuable to both, folks looking at the future of franchising as well as franchise brands that I'm sure are thinking about what they need to focus on in 2026. So
Yeah.
thanks again.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.